Hello and welcome to On the Right, a podcast that explores the personal and professional journeys of the world's most impactful leaders. We'll go behind the scenes to see how visionaries find their calling. I'm your host, Apoorv Agarwal, a serial entrepreneur and AI scientist, and I've spent the last decade building dream teams and commercializing AI. In each episode, we uncover the crucial decisions, risks, and revelations that have shaped these leaders, not just in their careers, but in their character. Joining me today is someone whose leadership and strategic vision have shaped one of the most respected organizations in the world, Greg Palm, former general counsel of Goldman Sachs, and truly a close mentor.
I'd never thought about being a general counsel. I became a lawyer, but I'm not sure I'm a natural lawyer. Thirdly, I did recognize that if I didn't take this type of job, somebody else would.
Greg, I'm so excited to have you today. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Look forward to our conversation.
Amazing. So Greg, former general counsel of Goldman Sachs, 30 years at Goldman, led massive teams and billions of dollars in legal risk and budgets, helped the firm navigate 2008 financial crisis. All of this with humble beginnings and growing up in rural America. As you look backwards, what have been the key inflection points in your life that you would say made you, if I may, earn the right to be at the top of the mountain?
Well, I'm not sure I'm at the top of the mountain, but I've been on the mountain. And so I've got to see some of the great climbers. And I've got to work with great people.
Yeah.
And you're never alone in anything you do. It's the team you have around you and the people you work with and so on. And that's made all the difference. And if I look back at my own life, as you say, I'm from Chenango Bridge, New York, upstate New York, small town. I don't know if it's rural beginnings, but certainly not the kind of beginnings that people associate with the world we live in today. Let's put it that way. I sort of thought about it's an interesting question. Actually, this will sound sort of peculiar. I was born in 1948, and some of your listeners probably have heard the year, but have met few people from it. But 1957, when they launched Sputnik, that caused the American government to say, hey, we're behind in science, we're behind in math, we're just behind. So what they did was they spent money on education in a variety of ways. And I went to a public school, elementary school, high school in upstate New York. And it was around that era when they created, more accelerated math programs, science programs, and so on. And I was fortunate enough or lucky enough just to be able to be pretty good at that stuff, as it were. And I'd say that was a inflection point that assisted me, which I had really nothing at all to do with. But I think the world opened up in a different way, at least for people in America, the United States. And then if I look beyond that, again, I'm probably not particularly cosmopolitan now, but back then, I hadn't really been south of the state of New Jersey or east of the state of New York.
Wow. When is the first time you...
First time I ever went east of New York State was the day I arrived at MIT as an undergraduate.
Oh my God. Wow. That's incredible.
And my parents certainly hadn't gone to college. My mother didn't go to high school.
Wow.
So it wasn't as though I had this on my agenda list. I'd heard of MIT.
Yeah.
Sounded interesting. Got in. I was fortunate enough to be given scholarships to go there.
Yeah.
And arrived in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the fall of 1966. And I can assure you, what's that phrase? I'm not in Kansas anymore. Well, I wasn't in Chenango Bridge anymore. It was different.
Yeah.
And when I went there, I didn't quite know what I really wanted to do. I had some notion I wanted to be a theoretical physicist. But I think I wanted to be a theoretical physicist because I didn't really like spending time in laboratories. And therefore, chalkboard seemed quite different from that. And I got there and I got to explore that. I got to explore a lot of different things. And then, as in most things, I fortuitously took an economics course in my sophomore year. And I discovered that I found that really very, very interesting.
So did you major in econ?
Yeah, one of my
math?
majors was in economics.
Okay.
And in fact, my plan migrated over. As you know, most big universities, by the time you're a junior, you're starting to take courses with graduate students.
Sure.
So I took a lot of economics courses with graduate students. I applied to graduate school at MIT. Got into economics there. Got funding, got a National Science Foundation fellowship, which was going to pay my way. But I then began to have some doubts, like I do about, many things, that although I could do the academic work just fine, I wasn't sure I was going to come up with interesting questions. And I began to think, well, what else might I do? And literally, I rode off to 2 law schools, got a catalog from Harvard Law School, always remember that. Said you shouldn't go to law school because you don't know what you really want to do.
Really? Would you say that's true for other?
Well, no. I think there are a lot of people you meet in law school who have perhaps always wanted to be lawyers. I never met a lawyer till I got to Harvard Law School, the professor.
Wow.
But in the back of the catalog, they had a joint program with the business school.
Interesting.
Of course, the way I looked at it, 4 years. And that sounded interesting too. Rather than 3, you get a couple degrees and it'll be very interesting.
Yeah.
I think today's world, who knows what I might have done. I might have accelerated out to be an analyst somewhere or gone to a startup or do something like that. But at the time, I think I was more than willing to I don't know, if it's like cooking soup, I was more than let the soup cook and see where life takes you. And when I arrived at law school, on the one hand, I found it all interesting, very interesting, and I didn't find it as taxing as MIT had been. Right?
Yeah.
So that was fun. But it's more like a series of inflection points, if you know what I mean.
Definitely.
I was fortunate because, again, in law school, I did fine academically, and therefore I had opportunities presented to me. At the time, I got what I would call a very interesting law clerkship. Before I got the one on the Supreme Court with Justice Powell, with a judge named Henry J. Friendly. He was widely regarded as the brightest living judge, etc. Wow. And I got a clerkship with him, and it was really a very moving experience. Because he clearly was a seminal thinker in law, and it was, very informative. And then the Supreme Court, for a variety of reasons, I learned a number of things there, and I love that too.
Yeah. And Greg, one thing I'd love to ask as we, move on, and so you've already mentioned a few of your inflection points. I'm curious, like one of the things people are told, and this is something I wish I did more of growing up, people say your worth is your network. And I see a lot of people encouraging young people to optimize for that, grow their network, meet people, stay connected with them, and almost like have put in extra effort to start building your network early. Is that something you were doing as you were going through MIT and Harvard intentionally? It happened organically, or would you say that didn't really play a super?
I'm going to say 2 different things. One, I think I can tell with hindsight, that's a very important thing to do. I can also say I'm an outlier, meaning I didn't ever intentionally do that in any way at all. What rings in my mind, I remember my mother used to say, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I used to rebel against that thought because we didn't know anybody. Okay. So I used to think it's all about your merit. Yeah. But I think part of merit is really networking because all these things that show the power of, we'll call it the crowdsourced idea or working with teams. Because, it's not really an inflection point, but when I got to Goldman Sachs, I remember one of the partners whose job it was to help acclimate people coming in laterally as partners, mentioned one of the things you really get measured here is not just by what you do, but the people you hire and bring in.
That's right.
And that's sort of stuck in my mind. And over time, I began to learn a lot more about the fact that the people you surround you with, you're surrounded by, they make everything you do much more powerful. It's not about one person. Nothing is.
Definitely.
Even though my own mind, at least when I was growing up, my thoughts were more encapsulated in the thought that there are these one-off pieces of inspiration that took you from here to there. But what I discovered, that could be true in some cases, no doubt, but mostly life's not really all about that. It's more about being surrounded by people you like working with and working together to achieve whatever it is you're, focused on. And I always remember that talk.
No, 100%, definitely. And so continuing your journey, you didn't really had heard about MIT, but then made it. In fact, majored in econ, got interested in law because you weren't sure what you wanted to do. And that seemed like a good idea, along with business, went to Harvard and clerked with one of the top judges of the time, the biggest thinkers. What happened next?
Oh, well, next I went to a large international, I think very well-regarded law firm, Sullivan Cromwell, as an associate, lawyer. And then 6 years later, I became a partner. Look, I think I had certain advantages because I had already been stamped with having been a, highly academically successful Supreme Court law clerk. And the interesting thing about law is 50 years later, people still say, oh, you clerked for Justice Powell.
Wow.
Like somehow that translates together. It would be the same way if someone met you and said, oh, you were first on the math Olympiad in 1979 or whatever.
Wow.
And I don't know if all professions are that way, but law still has that. So I had some advantage, which mean the presumption was that I could do things. And then I was fortunate enough to go to a law firm that had great clients, because lawyers often think they're the center of the universe, as you know. But you're very dependent on what your clients are doing, and you can do great work. But if you're not lucky or fortunate enough to have good clients, you're not going to have necessarily a very fortunate career. And I think I grew up during an era which had lots of opportunities again, because people will ask you, like, who are your mentors and how did you maybe network?
That's right.
And literally all I did was do the work.
Wow.
That was my path to whatever success I've had.
Wow.
Was I, worked hard, the results were okay. And if you're fortunate enough to have some good results at the beginning, at least in law, people then think you have good judgment, whatever that means. So when thing goes wrong, it's not really as much your fault.
Yeah.
But, and so in terms of inflection points in my practice of law, again, I migrated through all sorts of interesting projects and other things and took what came. And I think one of the points that affected the next change in my career was when Goldman Sachs came along and wanted Sullivan Cromwell to represent them on these privatizations in the UK. The UK government at that time was privatizing, everything from, airlines to water companies to electricity companies, et cetera. They were all government owned. And in that connection, you do that with, financial advisors, and there'd obviously be lawyers involved. And Goldman Sachs made it a condition of Sullivan Cromwell representing them that I'd be the partner in charge and go over there. Our senior partner at the time had other plans for me, but he had to put them on the shelf. So I went over to London.
And this is what year?
Oh, that was 1989 in the fall.
Okay, nice.
And I'd never really worked anywhere but New York in the time I spent at the Supreme Court. And although I traveled to Japan and Europe and the United States and met lots of interesting people, did all sorts of deals of various kinds. I'd never been a resident abroad, as it were, which in a different context. And I went over there in theory for 6 months, but ended up being there for 2 years because 2 months into my stint, the deal got postponed a year. And then, again, I view this as luck. I then ended up doing M&A work. We did the first, when Ford bought Jaguar, was the first cross-border international tender offer. And I got to work on that.
Wow.
And one thing follows another. So most of life is a combination of hard work, having the capacity to do whatever it is needs to be done, but also then being fortunate enough to have something happen that requires your talents or interests. I always tell people if it was the year 1200, just given my eyesight, I wouldn't have done very well in the village. I wouldn't have been that useful. But as time migrates, different skills become useful.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that was an inflection point only because I worked closely with some folks from Goldman Sachs. And parenthetically, I guess the predecessor luck of it, I would call it, is my principal client before doing that wasn't Goldman Sachs. I represented large multinational companies, other investment banks, but I happened to work with a few Goldman Sachs partners on some things. And so they knew me from that, and that's how that connection came up. But anyway, rolling it forward, spent 2 years in London, came back to New York, was placed in charge of all the corporate banking groups at Sullivan Cromwell, and started, back practicing corporate law, as it were. But then an unfortunate experience for Goldman Sachs proved to be fortunate for me, meaning there was an issue that came up in early 90s, which involved a fellow named Robert Maxwell, who was, if you look it up, you'll discover was a corporate marauder who defrauded a lot of people. And Goldman Sachs had the misfortune of being a financial advisor, normally on the other side from him, done trading with him, but it caused a huge problem. In any event, Bob Rubin and Steve Friedman, who were the senior partners then, asked me to come over and be co-general counsel and to work purposely on this one matter, which had nothing to do with anything I'd ever been doing, really, because I'd been a corporate lawyer, right? Did M&A, did all of that. I think I worked on one litigation matter as a first-year associate for the senior partner of Sullivan Cromwell for one of his clients, and that was it. And I always remember being called over to Goldman Sachs together with one of the senior litigation partners who was puzzled why I was coming. I was puzzled too. And then they said, we'd like to give you, that meaning me, Greg, an office over here. You'll still be a partner at Sullivan Cromwell, but we'd like you to work on this matter.
Wow.
And that was an inflection point because it involved regulatory law. It involved litigation big time. It involved criminal law. It involved all sorts of things. And it was, jurisdictions which I'd lived in, but really wasn't that familiar with. And I started to work on that matter. And that was an inflection point because sure enough, 5 or 6 months later, they then asked me to, as I say, be the co-general counsel, have a permanent office over there. Although offices at Goldman Sachs are never permanent. And I thought about it and I said, sure. Because it was very interesting.
And was that like aspirational for you? Is that something you wanted to do?
I'd never thought about being in-house anywhere.
Wow.
Or being a general counsel whatsoever. Goldman Sachs actually had been looking for a general counsel. Their first, they had a general counsel. Then they were, I'll use the word, generally upgrading, meaning they went out to look for someone to be general counsel. I remember at the time it came up, would I be someone who might be interested in it? And the answer was no. It wouldn't have crossed my mind whatsoever.
So interesting.
But it's all part, everyone has a different approach to things. If I thought about it, by the time I was a fourth-year student in the joint program at Harvard, I already knew I was going to I was either going to go to Sullivan and Cromwell or potentially Cravath, another of the big law firms. And I knew I'd probably be practicing securities-related law, et cetera. So you could ask me the question, so what did you study? Well, I purposely didn't study securities law at all because I figured I'd be doing that for the rest of my life or something like it. So instead I took administrative law, other things which I thought might be interesting, but I'd never get to touch or might run into. In the same way, I took the Goldman Sachs opportunity, and you have to decide why you take things. And it was mostly because I thought it'd be really interesting. Well, first of all, I get to be in a practice area I'd never really been in. And second of all, I was in a crisis management type situation, which I enjoyed. Thirdly, I did recognize that if I didn't take this type of job, somebody else would. And I didn't know whether I wanted to spend the rest of my life, because Goldman Sachs still liked me, having to interact mostly or more with their general counsel. Because I came from an era in which, I would say senior outside lawyers often had very good relationships with CEOs and boards of directors and otherwise. And then the role of the general counsel was starting to become more important. And therefore, if you asked me how often the senior partner or CEO of a Goldman Sachs would ever speak to outside counsel, would be a very small percentage of the time. Not that they were restricted from doing that, but because they wouldn't. They would talk to me, or they'd talk to Bob Katz, who was my co at the time, or other the general counsels who come along at Goldman Sachs over time.
That's interesting. Has that changed?
It was a change which gradually occurred. That I think that the role of general counsel became more important, and the kind of people who were attracted to the job were theoretically more able than the ones that were there before.
Interesting.
And maybe somewhat interestingly, if I actually look, it must depend on the industry, but if I look at the preponderance of general counsels who come along, and oftentimes in financial services, many times they have litigation type backgrounds because critical things to the firm in those types of areas tend to involve regulatory affairs, investigations, proceedings, whatever else, crisis, if you want to call that. And although there's this also big business of just running the legal department, other departments you might have responsibility for, a critical thing is this other area. And so that's where they often draw from. But there was a change over time. So, and when it happened, I can't tell you, and it'll vary by company and undoubtedly by CEO. Although, I guess I stayed in the job for a very long time because in most cases, CEOs were sort of like pharaohs. You tended to get buried when the CEO left. The general counsel often leaves too.
Yeah, yeah. And how big was Goldman at the time?
Well, when I started, actually, it was funny. I started in 92.
Okay.
And it had probably about 8,300 people globally. And since 92 and 93 was its best year, 94 was in its worst year. We were a private partnership for years. It got smaller, meaning we probably went down to, say, 7,300.
Interesting.
And then from there was, I wouldn't call it ineluctable growth, but huge growth.
Yeah.
One of the things we did was, because of the issues we saw happening in Europe or in Asia, was build out the legal departments there. So when I arrived at Goldman Sachs, there were 2 lawyers in London. Now there are, I'll round off. I can't tell you today because I'm 4 years out of date, but a couple hundred lawyers in London.
Yeah.
And obviously hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of compliance personnel and others. And so there's a life change. Yeah. And similarly, Asia is built out in the same way because it's a very intensively regulated business. And there's a lot for people to do.
Sure.
Change over time.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, no, that's incredible, Greg. And these days I see a lot of young people being very distracted some in almost a good way. What's happening here? What's happening there? How do I grow my network? Which events am I missing? Who am I missing shaking hands with? All of this, there's a lot of social media, of course, surrounding all of this, right? And there's a lot of distraction. But what I'm hearing from you is that you really just wanted to be really good at the, art of law, spent a lot of time focusing, being, learning it to the best possible way. And then, of course, underlying all of that is curiosity. So it's not like you're intentionally or, going outside of your world to network, expand your network in some ways, but being curious about what does this entail?
Yeah, no, I'd say my networks grew over time, but it was mostly through the dint of what I was doing and what I encountered and what I did.
Yeah,
I would view it as a weakness. I believe in myself that I didn't build, perhaps better networks in advance. I don't think it turned out to be harmful because I'm pretty good at intensely focusing on the task at hand. And I'm pretty good at catching up and doing things. But I think networks are actually very important. But people who spend all their time building networks I find a little bit curious only because you have to have something, I assume, to offer to the rest of the network, which has to be whatever you're doing.
That's right.
But you should have time for that. And again, I don't view it as a plus. I view it as, over time, having watched it, as more of a weakness. And if I looked at a firm like Goldman Sachs, it's a very organic body where its great strength is the fact it's so closely networked both amongst itself and across the world.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I enjoyed very much being at Goldman Sachs was I always viewed being at management committee every Monday as a window on the world because you get reports from every significant sector and geographic area as to what was going on and why. And you knew, even though you could never ascertain exactly what the true circumstances are, you get a much more accurate rendition than you could ever get from just, reading the media. So that's one of the things I genuinely miss about not going to management committee. It was more of a window on the world, which I loved.
Yeah.
But the networking is very important because when you call, a firm like ours and you want to accomplish something, you want people who, if they can't connect you to it or figure it out, they can call one of their colleagues and get back to you right away with probably a pretty good path. And that's one of the striking things I know that Goldman Sachs was recognized for among its client base, is you can call a lot of firms and you might hear something in a couple of days, but they're not as networked together in quite the same way.
Yeah.
It's not like, what is it, the Borg in Star Wars? Not Star Wars, Star Trek, excuse me. Star Wars is too near. Star Trek, where you're seamlessly integrated together.
Yeah.
But that's the concept. You want to have a network. If I were to take the Goldman Sachs attempt at one firm, to have a large network.
Yeah.
In part, but it has to be something you genuinely
That's right.
not only contribute to, but you have to enjoy the people you're working with.
Yeah, makes sense. That's awesome. Greg, let's rewind the clock. I want to go back to 2008 because that's hard to not talk about. So, global financial crisis, an absolute black swan event, unprecedented legal, financial, and regulatory risks. Help us understand what was going through your mind. What was your emotional state? How were you feeling? I'm sure you managed a way to stay calm and composed because that was a time you had to make a lot of important and big decisions. Just give us a view into your emotional state and how are you doing and how are you feeling during that time?
Oh, I think 2008 was a very tough period for a variety of reasons. And I give great credit to actually our CEO, Lloyd Blankfein, as well as the board, who was very supportive of the firm at the time. It's a wonderful experience when you have a team you can count on. And some people are better in crisis than others. And some of the people can be really great on the even playing field. In fact, better than the others. There's a basic team there, an effort working and everything. And someone has to make decisions. Ultimately, it's the CEO. The first thing about it was the crisis, if you want to call it that, was something that really felt like a great burden in a way, simply because obviously the banks were viewed as the cause of the whole problem.
Yeah.
Which we'll put aside whether that's true or not, because I may view it as not being true. Others may view it as being as true or whatever. But you had to operate under that burden. Well, the first question is, how are you going to survive? Okay, that's, whether or not a firm survives or not is an important question, at least in the minds of the people who were there. Obviously, in 2008, the first thing that happened was, I remember in March, Bear Stearns disappeared and got acquired by, J.P. Morgan.
Yeah, it's interesting actually to give you a Bear Stearns story. I had applied there for an internship.
Right.
I thought my interviews went really well. Never heard back. And then eventually read the news that, they had dissolved. But yeah, that was a very, very unprecedented, unpredictable, very interesting, very different time.
No, I remember because we got a call from the one of our principal a principal regulator, not of us, but a principal regulator. And I was actually sitting in a JetBlue plane on my way to, I think, somewhere like St. Lucia to get on another plane to go somewhere else to join my family on spring vacation. Mm-hmm. And it was something like 7 a.m.
Yeah.
And I got this call and I said, oh, and I called our CEO and he said, well, I wouldn't worry about it unless you have a check for N billion dollars, because there's going to be what I call Bear Stearns weekend.
Mm-hmm.
He said, nah, you don't need to come back right now because don't worry, we'll have you come back if we need you.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. So for that, I got somewhat of a minor pass, but then later on I ended up flying back and forth, but I had, again, luck because a senior person from Merrill Lynch was where we were vacationing and their plane took him back and forth. So I bumped
That's
the ride.
Convenient.
Yeah, very, very convenient. But so that happened at the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways it didn't feel like it. You knew it had a lot to do with what might be happening.
Mm-hmm.
But Goldman Sachs' biggest focus in life is risk.
Mm-hmm.
Put aside legal risk, but just risk generally, including legal risk, but everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And we were fortunate enough that we identified the fact we didn't know what was going on in markets early on.
Mm-hmm.
So we tried to flatten ourselves out.
Mm-hmm.
We also have always maintained liquidity,
mm-hmm.
or did at a very high level,
mm-hmm.
meaning we run scenario. I remember this back from 1992 when I arrived at the firm and went to management committee. There's a graph which will show how long you can last as a firm if no one does business with you and you have to keep paying out your obligations.
Interesting.
It costs money to do that, creating enough liquidity, and the goal is to have at least 90 days, 3 months.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Bear Stearns liquidity policy, if you look, seemed to be overnight, meaning
wow,
their funding was overnight at some level.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was a little bit better than that, but maybe not much because
mm-hmm.
investment banks, all banks, they're leveraged.
That's
Equities leveraged
Yeah.
With debt. For whatever reason, tomorrow someone decides to stop doing business with the biggest and best bank in the world,
mm-hmm.
they'll eventually go out of business.
In 3 months.
Well, no, it won't be 3 months. It could be 30 days for all I know, but it'll be some period of time. It won't happen.
Yeah.
The government undoubtedly in that country will help protect them in some ways or do other things. But there's an irrationality in the air. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And by the autumn of 2008, there was a lot of rationality and irrationality floating around.
Mm-hmm.
So there were firms that would come into danger of disappearing,
mm-hmm.
even though they were profitable, even though they were well managed, and they would go one by one, and the market would move and target another firm.
Yeah.
One of my jokes would simply be, there was no one rooting for Morgan Stanley more than we were,
mm-hmm.
because who knows, we might have been next in line for the Death Star.
Mm-hmm.
Morgan Stanley obviously survived and does very, very well as a firm,
mm-hmm.
great people, great franchise, well managed, and so on and so forth. But when the market picks its mark for the reasons that I've described involving liquidity, you have to make it through. So when something is sort of outside your hands,
mm-hmm.
like that, it's not frightening. You're not catatonic, because if you're catatonic, you don't know what to do. But what we did then was we went and got an outside investor to show that we were a firm that could stand the test of time. And Warren Buffett Berkshire Hathaway came in,
mm-hmm.
and we sold securities to him, which were very handsome securities,
mm-hmm.
because he's a very astute investor.
Mm-hmm.
But it also showed that he was willing to invest in us, which would help support it. But it was a very troubling time. Obviously, at that stage, we were then being investigated by multiple congressional committees, regulators, and so on. And one of my lines, which has some truth, in America, something's gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I've lost money.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's not my fault. I know it's somebody's fault.
Mm-hmm.
And you turn and find whose fault it is.
That's right.
So I think much of 2009 and 10 was about finding fault. And I'd also say, however, that the financial system itself did need strengthening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think regulation improved it in a variety of ways. And the capital requirements for banks and so on were strengthened.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think the system's way, way much safer today than it was before.
But there must have been like a stressful time, or would you say it was?
I like walking uphill better than downhill. It's funny.
Uh-huh.
I always call them interesting times.
Okay.
But people would tell me I did look tired.
Uh-huh.
So I think if I go back and look at a picture of myself sitting behind Lloyd Blankfein
Mm-hmm.
at a Senate hearing,
Mm-hmm.
and Lloyd was one of the people testifying. A number of our CFO and others had to testify. And I look at that person, I could say that, that person looks fairly gaunt.
Mm-hmm.
He looks fairly tired.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we were fairly busy.
Yeah.
So it was like every day was, an important day in the life of the firm. There was no, peace came later.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like, oh, you're being investigated. 3 years later, you're going to have a settlement.
Yeah.
It was more every day is something new. You're being attacked in the press.
That's right.
It was an all hands type of situation during that period. So that was stressful.
Yeah.
But I couldn't have stayed in the job for, there's 3 decades.
Yeah.
Rounding off, unless I can survive stress. I don't tend to show stress that much, but of course it's stressful.
Yeah.
But I sort of like it too in a way.
Yeah.
It's difficult to explain. I can, if I'm working and everything's going well, Goldman Sachs has high earnings. We settled most of our prominent cases. That would be a situation in which my mind would wander. Not really wander, but there's a lot of other things you have to do as general counsel or people in charge of compliance or audit or other things.
Yeah. So, Greg, I want to ask you about innovation. General counsels and lawyers at large are supposed to be risk-averse people. Investing in startups, especially early-stage startups, is one of the riskiest things you can do. You've been both a general counsel, you're a lawyer, and you have a big portfolio of investment in several early-stage startups, all the way from legal tech to, last time I heard, a space company, which is very interesting. How does your risk-averse nature interact with your adventurous self?
First, I'd say that you're correct that many, many lawyers are risk-averse. And the reason they are is lawyers are judged by a sort of a different standard. If you're, for example, a trader on a desk, if you can get things right 53% of the time, you're going to be a wonderful person. People are going to reward you very well. When people get legal advice, they expect you to give them the quote correct, unquote, legal advice, whatever that might be. So a lot of lawyers are always striving to figure it out down to the last detail. On the one hand, I think, as I probably indicated at the beginning, and perhaps not, I became a lawyer, but I'm not sure I'm a natural lawyer, meaning I think I could have done a lot of other different things equally as well. And I sort of, at least in my own belief about life, the future is very unpredictable. Okay. And you make your best judgment about what it's going to be. Investing in startups, I view as interesting as well as hopefully economically rewarding, but there's an interest component to it. So I didn't invest in that way at all while I was at Goldman Sachs. I viewed my job as general counsel. I viewed the role I was in. I viewed it as being inappropriate for me to be off investing. I did invest a lot in private equity, but it was all through funds. They were all Goldman Sachs funds. And I'm trying to think of any exceptions. There might have been a couple of exceptions, but it wasn't that venue. By investing, and it wouldn't have to be huge amounts, but enough to make it interesting, you would then have a chance to learn something about something you knew nothing about.
That's right. And the add-on feature being learning about an area through the entrepreneur.
Well, through the entrepreneur, through the investment process, and then obviously you get updates as time passes. So, for example, if for whatever reason you have some general interest in, what is crypto all about? Okay. Or what is AI all about? Obviously, you can get the white paper and read that. And that tells you something about blockchain, which is very important. And that's a very interesting idea. And you can then see how it has wide applicability. But there are so many different kinds of applications. And then once you've looked at a few of those, you can really see how the whole world will change. And so then you wonder about the role of various trusted intermediaries, which are just going to disappear in a variety of circumstances. And for most people, I think it's very hard to grasp that unless you actually get enough into it to understand it. And in theory, you're motivated to understand it more by investing. And again, it's not as though your understanding will affect the course of whatever dollars you put in.
Yeah.
It may affect your understanding when there's a next round, because there always is.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's a learning experience which has broader applicability. One of the things that's also true that I get a lot out of the generally younger people involved. Well, most of the world is younger than I am, so that's a lot of people. But younger people who are starting new companies, affiliated with universities and doing interesting things. Keeps your mind awake.
Got it. And are there any specific themes? I know you've had legal tech investments. It sounds like you've made some blockchain investments. Last time we spoke, you told me about space investment. Are there general themes or areas you want to learn more about?
I invested in SpaceX a long time ago. Okay. And that was interesting because to me, I find that a remarkable story. I mean, the whole concept that, I want to go into space, I want to get to Mars, and I'm going to build space vehicles because, most people find that somewhat preposterous.
Yep.
How are you going to compete with the government? Well, pretty easily, as it turns out, because you just work at it. Okay. And you get good people and it takes time and
that's right.
And so on. And there clearly are advances which other people are making for the same reasons. And that can be just, quite interesting, where I could think of one investment, which is, I don't know if you recall, but there was a solar powered plane which went around the world and it can carry a 800-pound payload.
Wow.
600 to 800, I think, pound payload. Well, there's a company that's doing that for commercialization. It has a variety of uses, both whether it's in telecommunications or otherwise. And it's much, much cheaper than a lot of alternatives. Also, if you thought about border surveillance or surveillance of all sorts of things. So it's just an interesting application of technology. Now, I'm on the board of I'm going to call it a pharmaceutical startup, which we have a small molecule, the essence of which is it really goes to the core causes of inflammation, but very much the core causes. And I thought that was not only I think the science was really interesting, okay, it's all biological sciences, but I thought the product was wonderful. Now, the company may not ultimately be economically viable. The science isn't the problem, but the difference between that and, say, someone in software-related development or otherwise is you're in a huge regulatory system, so it literally takes years and years and years in clinical trials. Well, that was pretty interesting too. So I've been on the board there, and I've learned a lot from the ground up what it's like to be at a company that's, obviously somewhat bigger, but not that much bigger, and all the different things you need to do to get from here to there to be successful. But it's all very interesting. See, to me, it's like working. I could make a joke, and now I can say this. Some people would pay to go to Goldman Sachs management. Meaning, it was the world is that interesting.
Of course.
Now, I was glad they were paying me, as it turned out. But it's just it's a funny feature of life, which you get something out of whatever you do. And that's when people always ask, well, what should I, obviously people must come to you and say, what should I pursue and what should I do? And, you talk to them about that. You got to find something they really get something out of and it's enjoyable. And I think being on the board was interesting, or is interesting, in part because, as with all companies, there are issues and problems that come up.
That's right.
And you get to deal with them. And the funny part is, with a very, very small company, you don't have the budget to spend on hiring law firms and anyone else. So people will call you and they'll get the free legal advice from the board member. And it's not really legal advice necessarily. Of course. It's supposed to just advice for what to do. And to be doing that still is good, because it reactivates neural connections that otherwise would be totally atrophying. So it's fun.
That's amazing. That's incredible. Greg, next I want to talk about your key aha moments and learnings. Of course, you've had an incredible career, great run, senior leader at one of the world's largest firms, highly regulated. As you look back, what have been some of those light bulb moments where something just clicked and it changed the way you thought or led? Or maybe it came across as a setback, but in hindsight, turned out to be an opportunity. What would you say were your key aha moments and learnings been?
Oh, interesting question. So they're simple things. So, for example, in the middle of the financial crisis, you don't want to walk around looking distraught and mopey and, God, are we going to make it through the day? Are we going to make it to the next day? Is this going to kill us? No. You have to go in there strong, be happy. What could go wrong? Yeah. You could be, would you say, scared as shit, but otherwise don't show it. Yeah. So you learn that over time. I'm trying to remember I'm trying to actually try to think back. So what were bad days? Like what was a bad day at Goldman Sachs? Yeah. The one bad day I can remember, which I learned, I think something from, was back in the 2000s, as it were, after the financial crisis. We got sued by the SEC one day, and literally our stock dropped by 10%. So, and I was sitting there looking at a screen. I was in my office, and I saw our stock dropped. But one of the lawyers who reported to me, litigation lawyers, comes charging in to say, we got sued by SEC. I said, over what? I had no idea what case they were bringing. They hadn't informed us. They hadn't told us about it, and they brought this case. And it turned out they did that for a variety of reasons. I think mostly because they just wanted to have the headline of bringing the case, but it was a big surprise. What I took away from that was you have to be prepared for the unexpected. And when I went back, and as you might imagine, you go back and evaluate every contact anybody had with the SEC involving the matter in question, et cetera, as to what signals they were sending or otherwise, and who went to the meetings and who didn't. And then you had to, I think I did an assessment. So what kind of lawyers do you want from the outside working on your projects? And you have to have the right mix of people with deep intellects, but also people who can really understand and read people. Yeah. And some would think, based on the last meeting they had, that this might have been something that might happen. And if I'd known that, then of course I would have acted in advance to try to make it not happen. Yep. Because I obviously called up the then head of enforcement to say, blah, 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 why did you blindside us, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But being me, I ended the conversation. So what do you want? Yeah. And we then talked over the weekend to figure out down a path that would take us somewhere, because you really don't want that to happen. So you try to guard against that in all respects. Yeah. Sometimes you're not going to be able to, because sometimes folks will take a position that's intolerable, but usually you can make it work. And I then learned you can never be too close to the principal person who's on the other side from you, because if you establish a relationship with them, they're far less likely to do that to you because there's some connection. Again, the great things I thought about working at Goldman Sachs is I got to observe a lot of really able people. Yeah. And they weren't the same in any regard, but they had some shared characteristics, meaning they could have an ability to analyze and get from here to there and go and do certain things, which you couldn't tell whether they really were seeing this, but they clearly were. Yeah. But they were developing a path. And it wasn't a place of yelling and jumping up and down and screaming and whatever. Maybe it was one-on-one with like if you had a co-head, maybe you two in private might yell at each other, but to the outside world, you're a unified whole. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But you learn a lot about management and how people are effective, I think. No, one thing I've consistently heard about from general counsels is you're always wondering where the bullet is coming from. And to me, that's, a bit uneasy, right? If it's unnerving, then you have to leave the job. Yeah. So it's something you can't entirely protect against. And things can go wrong, even if it's, quote, not your fault. Yeah. So I think I was particularly lucky because the litigations I took to conclusion, we just won. I remember winning basically a verdict in the UK where if we'd lost, we would be paying $1.6 billion or some such large number.
Wow.
And we could have settled, we thought, for a significantly lower number, but not as low as it should have been. And we took the risk of continuing onward because, among other jurisdictions, I think the UK is a very good court system. And we thought we were right, but you never know.
Yeah.
You just never know.
Yeah.
So what you have to do, though, is you have to be able to build a big organization that's actually got a lot of really good people. You have to give them a lot more autonomy than you might, some might think appropriate or not. I was particularly fortunate. I had some really good partners in legal.
Yeah.
Well, when they left, like one of whom I'm thinking of now, went off to be the senior partner at a major law firm. Where he'd been before he became the Goldman Sachs as a partner. And then he was a partner at Goldman Sachs for a while. And then he went back there as their senior partner and so on.
Yeah.
Guys like that want to operate and they don't want somebody looking over their shoulder. But they do come to talk to you about things because, again, you have to know what's going on. If you don't know, you have to be transparent with one another.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you can never overeducate the people around you on either the leadership side or the board side, because when something does go wrong, lots of people have amnesia naturally. Yeah. So, but you really want to help them understand the risks.
Yeah.
It's tough, and I think one of the toughest parts is that many of them are very experienced people, particularly board members, who've dealt with lawyers who I think many times exaggerate the risks. Meaning it's always going to be tough to get your way through this.
Yeah.
And then they get you through it.
Yeah.
And then they've obviously showed how successful they are.
Yeah.
But so it's an interesting question because if you actually think you can get them through it, you have to really lay out all the risks because they may hear that as a layup, even though it is a 55-45 or 60-40, which, people don't really want that. They really want 90-10, and even they don't even like that because they just don't like the risk. Yeah. The downside is too great.
Greg, this has been fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
We'll see what the questions are, and then I'll tell you whether I'm ready after.
What's a Wall Street myth you'd like to bust?
I think there's this myth, if you look at these movies like Wall Street or otherwise, that there are all these characters walking around like Gordon Gekko or somebody who's quite sleazy with slick back hair, just taking advantage of people all the time, which I actually, at least based on my experiences, and again, I only worked at one firm, couldn't be further from the truth. I don't know if it's still a Goldman Sachs model. We're in for the long-term greedy, not short-term greedy, meaning obviously people are there to do well, but it's mostly their competitive spirit.
Yeah.
They just like to win.
Yeah.
But in order to win for the long term, you have to create benefits for people.
That's right.
People don't come to you unless you're doing something for them. It can't really be for you in the long term. So I think most bankers and banks, that's what they're actually have to do to be successful over the long term. So when you look at the firms that built themselves out and done well and survived, you can look at the Vanguards or Fidelity or Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley. If they were the mythical investment banking firm, they wouldn't be there. People wouldn't do business with them.
Yeah.
It's not like you're required to. So I think that's somewhat mythical.
Yeah, makes sense. Your favorite restaurant in New York and why?
One of them would be Santanucci. And it's not necessarily my favorite restaurant in New York, but it's certainly a restaurant I enjoy. Yeah. And there are others which would fall into the same category. It's a question you could ask of eaters, but it's a question you could ask most people, and they would know all about that, and they wouldn't even know where their kitchen was.
Yeah, for sure. You met Mick Jagger, you met Obama, you spent time with Warren Buffett. Is there still one person you'd kill to get a meeting with or spend time with?
There's probably no one I would kill to have a meeting with. I grew up as a Catholic, so I can't be sure about these things, so I have to, watch myself. No, but all joking aside, thinking about that question, it depends on two different factors. I'd love to meet someone, assuming they're going to be candid about what they do and why they do it,
Mm-hmm.
because that would just be fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is I'm not good at picking and choosing. So there are a number of world leaders I'd really love to know what makes them tick.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the head of China,
Mm-hmm.
Putin,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. I'd actually like to know. So really, I know what you say publicly. What really makes you tick? What do you want for China?
Yeah.
What do you want for your people?
Yeah.
What do you really think about?
Yeah.
I'd just be curious.
Yeah.
But I don't really have a good answer for you.
No, that's a great answer, actually. If people are candid, yep, I can think of many more people. The key thing is, are they going to be candid? Greg, this was so much fun. I'm really grateful for you to make the time. Loved your stories, loved your insights, and even though we've known each other for many years, loved discovering new things about you. I honestly feel extremely privileged to have earned the right to get to know you better. So thank you so much for your time and all the insights.
Well, I don't know if there are any insights, but it was fun. Most people always enjoy hearing themselves talk, but I'm probably no exception. But anyway, it was fun. Thank you. Someday I want to be sitting over there asking you questions.
Would love that.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg.